Hello everyone, and welcome to a Crusader Kings 3 Chapter 4 reveal dev diary. Since Hearts of Iron 4 has been needing some TLC, I've decided to take a quick step back, I guess no step back, as they work through their timeline of fixing up the game to make it more of the vision perhaps that people wanted. As you can see by the timeline on screen, we've got quite a few patches before we end up with the final view in April, so I'm not sure how many Hoi videos I'll actually be making, but where one door closes, another opens. Luckily, Paradox Studio Black has been cooking and has delivered a new chapter for us to go over. So, in this video I'm going to be going through the mainstay content of what they've shown us so far and then giving my opinions. The final thing, before we jump in, if you like these videos or the kind of coverage I do, then please consider subscribing, as it really helps me out and motivates me to keep going. And with that, let's see this Chapter 4. Our dev diary begins with two pieces of media. The first is the header image, which we saw at the start of the video, representing the steppe, the Chinese and generally Asia. There was some doubt whether Asia would ever be added, but to be honest, I kind of saw this coming a while back. They never hid it from us according to their floor plan that they intended to expand the map, and the map was already cut off, so I couldn't have imagined anywhere else they would go than adding in Asia. Below that though, you can find a video dev diary, akin to the text-based dev diary, where you can watch the developers talk about some of their creations and get a few clips relevant to what's coming next. And so, the first release we can expect for Chapter 4 is going to be Khans of the Steppe, releasing on April 28th, so not too far away from the release date of this video. We do already have some information about what this DLC is going to be about from a previous dev diary called Step by Step, which broke down some of the ideas they had for the mechanics, but now that it's in this dev diary, I imagine things are a lot more concrete than they were back then. The key features coming with this DLC are a nomadic government, where you're not going to be living in a single static location, but travelling around from place to place. When I first heard this, it kind of reminded me of EU4 native indigenous American mechanics, where you'd have a kind of region that was considered yours, but you would only exist in one of those territories and could build up devastation before you'd have to move to another territory. And that is the same vibe I'm getting with this, with the fertility and having to move around. Additionally, they mention how the chieftains can roam peacefully by negotiating with neighbouring shepherds or seize their pastures by force, so there is going to be a new kind of unplayable government AI characters in the world in the form of shepherd people who don't really do anything, they just raise the fertility of the land, and since you can't play as them, they're just going to be out there living their best life. For those of you who didn't see Step by Step though, here is what a work in progress image of what the migration screen would look like, so your character can move through different places with high fertility across the Eurasian steppe. Down here in Ukraine you can really see the breadbasket of Europe glowing green, but in the more northerly regions things are a little less easy to maybe live in, so there could be a desire for people living in Mongolia to head west as quickly as they can so they can make the most of this untapped resources over here. And from the people that you will be taking some of the land are the shepherd, Zundus perhaps is what he's called, where he has a wonderful little sheep friend, a herder realm specifically, so a shepherd is in a herder realm, and this should break up some of the territory where not every aspect of the Eurasian steppe is going to be dominated by potential warlords. There are actually going to be, I guess, less warlords and more herder territories, so the ones who really grow to power stand out. The next key feature is herd, which is another form of currency or mana, depending on what you want to call it, representing your horses, cattle and strength within the steppe. Since the amount of horses and cattle you have kind of determines your wealth in this period and area, it's going to be your main fuel for all of your conquests. I guess there isn't too much you can buy with gold in the middle of a giant grass plain. From what we've seen of herd, it seems like one use they're going to have is to be able to upgrade new horde regiments, which are effectively an even sort of stronger version of men-at-arms as far as I can tell, where you're not just spending gold, but also spending your herd to buy the horde regiments. As I had just mentioned, because of the presence of herders and shepherds, there aren't necessarily going to be as many individual warlords all across the steppe, which is where dominance might come into play, as you have to prove your might by trying to conquer as much territory and gain as much power in the region. They claim that at its highest level, you can claim the mantle of Genghis Khan, or Chinggis Khan, as the universal ruler and scourge of the gods. The last part of key features is about seasons and survival. Because it's going to be harsh living in the steppe, there's talk about having particularly terrible winters and very unfortunately strong summers, which can change the fertility in the region. This image here is our key information we have to go off on what those kind of disasters are going to look like. The white zud, the snows are coming, and a severe drought, with abundant grazing being the ideal hopes that you can go for. Since we know that the steppe reaches as far as Ukraine, it's interesting that the western steppe is considered to have a potential severe drought, when I couldn't imagine Ukraine looking like this. But in total, that sums up the Khans of the steppe. So what is my opinion on this core expansion? Well, it's hard to do worse than what happened with Legends of the Dead, because with such a kind of direct theme of Mongols, also a very, I think, loved theme in this period, the Genghis Khan spirit of building this huge horde and attacking Europe definitely has a lot of key appeal. I think it would be difficult to miss the mark with this. One complaint I am hearing, though, is how the representation of these kind of nomadic, growing warlords and herder communities is going to be represented across other parts of the map, or is it going to be exclusively isolated? Because the DLC seems to be so much focused on Mongolic culture, there are questions about how Turkic cultures would be represented, and also those in North Africa, who also could be seen through the lens of just having herding shepherd cultures, and not necessarily everybody being a near-feudal or clan warlord ready to take over the region. And so my initial reaction to Khans of the Steppe is a cautious optimism. Due to the nature of the content just being so appealing, it's really hard to see how you could get it wrong. Oh, and if there's going to be an in-game soundtrack filled with tons of Mongolic throat singing, well, that's just an instant buy, no questions asked. The next DLC, this dev diary doesn't do too much to illuminate us on what it actually is, so some questions about what to expect. We know it's called the event pack Coronations, which is probably going to follow in the footsteps of previous event packs. With Wards and Wardens, we had the university activity and interactions with children. In Wandering Nobles, we had 3 different activities and events relating to travelling. And now we've got the event pack Coronations, with the new coronation activity, allowing you to establish your right to rule in the eyes of your vassals and subjects. So, presumably are going to be about increasing legitimacy, opinion gain, those kind of things. But so be it. Where the dev diary has failed to provide, Steam may help us out in our cause. So, kneel for the crowning. Assemble your vassals to witness the consecration of a new ruler with the Coronations event pack. Take an oath and declare the vision of your ruler you want to be. Maintain the promise of protection and prosperity, or the displeasure of your subjects. Key features will include the new activity of Coronations, legitimize your rule, so it is to do with legitimacy through grand coronations. Take an oath to decide upon how your rule will turn out. That is interesting, I'll get back to that. And bring together your vassals for a large ceremony to celebrate your new rule of the realm. There will also be new councillor and vassal events. Okay, so I think this is a far better indication of what you're going to expect from the Coronations DLC. Let's break it down. The new activity is probably going to be a grand activity, i.e. you can only do it once, probably at the start of your reign, maybe within the first 5 to 10 years, and then once you've done it, done. The key goal is going to be gaining tons of legitimacy, which is important, especially if you've just conquered a realm or you've just inherited it, meaning you're doubtful to be very legitimate at all, there's no reason you would be, and with that making sure that the vassals aren't instantly going to depose you. Basically, it makes the game easier, which is unfortunate, but we'll move on. You get to take an oath to decide about how your rule will turn out. That to me comes across as ambitions. So CK2 previously had these things called ambitions, which you could basically select as a miniature objective or focus tree or mission, where you'd have things like build a treasury, get this much gold, or become king of a title, or have a son, those kind of things, just basic, very clear direct goals. And I'm wondering if it's going to work something similar with Coronations, where you're going to have to pick some kind of goal about conquering a neighbour, or building up a treasury, or researching a tech, I'm not sure. But there is something within there about ambitions I feel that is a parallel, so it could be interesting to see. The second hand of this is about the new councillor and vassal events, which I think is probably going to be a good thing depending on how it's worked. What this game has lacked, and I'm worried that this might make the game easier, is difficulty. A lot of the time you're just out spending gold and doing things without facing much friction, when I feel that a lot of medieval rulership was challenges into challenges into challenges, and my real hope, is that a lot of the councillor and vassal events are going to be about proposing you with issues that you have to solve. How they actually go about doing this is going to be the ultimate test of quality. I actually can be a little bit concerned, so compared to the previous Steppe DLC, which I think is probably going to be pretty safe in terms of quality because of it's just Mongolian culture, it's going to be great, right? With this one, I'm a little bit more concerned. We're going to see. I'm sure the price will also come into question, but I'm not necessarily against it, and I know that a lot of people have been wanting Coronations, so maybe they're going to do something great with it. Although I will say it's probably slightly unfortunate for those people who saw this piece of art and were thinking that it was going to be something to do with HRE rework, maybe something to do with the papacy, considering we can see the old Popey boy standing right there. I guess we're never lucky. And so we come to the last part of Chapter 4, the major expansion, called All Under Heaven, which I feel is an interesting name for a DLC. It's certainly not what I would have called it. I would have just gone straight to Mandate of Heaven, but All Under Heaven works too. Paradox describes All Under Heaven to be the largest and most ambitious expansion in CK3 history. No, they say CK across the board. They're completing the map of the medieval world by getting all of Asia. This is China, Japan, Korea, Malaysia. I'm pretty sure the Philippines are going to be in there. I mean, a tremendous amount. The key features you can expect are from Ireland to Cathay, the celestial might of Imperial China and the unique governments of Japan and Korea. That's important because there is some concern that Japan and Korea might be a little undercooked in favour of China, but I would still say this is particularly a Chinese DLC. To the god kings of the Indonesian archipelago, my goodness, straight into Indonesia. Each new area in All Under Heaven features new cultures, faith and flavour. I'm unsure how much of a controversial opinion this is going to be, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a fair proportion of players who were actually more hyped about the idea of Japan being in the game, because there's so much kind of popularization in media about Japan that I guess this pre sort of early day samurai gameplay is going to be very appealing to people. I say that because the Sengoku period, which is what I think people are traditionally thinking of when they're thinking about sort of samurai, Japan, that kind of thing, isn't actually available until the 15th and 16th centuries, so that's kind of an EU5 thing. But that being said, I guess there's still going to be some appeal for Japan. Okay, sorry, I got distracted. Hegemonies is another key feature coming. To represent the power and influence of China in this period, they're introducing a new tier of title above an empire, the hegemony. Which is interesting because I would have called it hegemon, singular, not a hegemony. I guess both are equally applicable? Huh. This new title tier allows for further granular representation of the division of power within large-scale realms. So, that's great. It's interesting. A new tier. Makes sense. China is ridiculously huge, and when it breaks up into different kind of warring kingdoms, those kingdoms are roughly empire scale by European standards. That being said, back in Europe, you can reform the Roman Empire. Does that mean that Rome is going to be able to become a hegemon? An interesting idea. Next up is dynastic cycles. The fate of the imperial dynasties follows a cyclical pattern, reflecting historical eras of stability and eras of chaos. Free body problem. Sorry, that's just that particular phrasing. Players will struggle to maintain the mandate of heaven and prove that they are the right choice to navigate the Empire through treacherous waters. Okay, I like this. I really like this. Now, I don't know what it's going to be like, so on release it could not be good, but from my initial reaction, I really like it, because what CK3 is lacking is enough things that completely upend your plans. The world is stable. Every era is a stable era in CK3, because the game is so easily solved. You can get money, prestige, all the mana that you need, make sure your vassals like you, and nothing happens. But if the dynastic cycle allows for chaotic things to happen, like a star sign goes wrong and then suddenly people start changing their minds about you, domino effects start building up, and then the Empire is completely against you, that could be such an interesting system to try and navigate through. Thinking back to CK2, the instability of realms was much stronger from a player's perspective compared to CK3. I'm okay with things making sense and not every outcome being determined by RNG, but I also want there to be some friction to overcome, and in the current version of the game, it doesn't feel like there's necessarily enough friction for you to be able to struggle against. It's kind of, solved. The last key feature they talk about is the Imperial Treasury. A new centralized treasury system for the Chinese Emperor represents the flow of wealth upward and into the Empire's coffers, letting you decide how to spend or squander resources that could make or break the realm. With this expansion, they're actually planning on starting dev diaries discussing it far earlier, way back into May, so there could be a lot of time to talk about the development of this DLC. In terms of the Imperial Treasury though, that's interesting for a few reasons. The idea that the state's money is different than your personal money is actually an idea I was thinking about to be applied across the entire game, because as it stands right now, you have this weird imbalance where on one hand you're spending very small amounts of money to build buildings, but then spending ridiculous amounts of money to do things like go to university. The entire economy of the game is such a question mark of random, nonsensical, arbitrary numbers that it kind of just breaks down. With something like the Imperial Treasury, I do wonder if there's a question to be asked about the entire game separating the economy of the nation versus the economy of your character, and with that, you can choose to donate money into the treasury, but maybe there's only a finite amount you can do due to inflation, and because of that, suddenly there's like an interesting gameplay balance between how much money can you take out of the state, how much money can the state provide to build up the nation. When the game is seen through that lens, I feel the balance of this could be massively improved. Additionally, it opens up questions about how something like merchant republics are going to be added, because typically you would expect different families to all be operating within the same little republic. But when the inheritance happens, or election I suppose, who will inherit the funds of the nation versus just taking your family wealth? That would kind of be strange, you know? Oh no, I lost the election, so they get to take my house. Doesn't really feel right. But with a treasury system, that solves that problem. So yeah, very interesting stuff, and honestly, maybe a question of expanding such a feature across the entire game. That could be a good step towards solving some of the imbalance. A personal money, and then the state treasury as a concept. But because this video wasn't long enough and I wanted to talk to you by talking even more, I decided to head over to Steam and see the early information they've got over there about some of the stuff they're adding. Sometimes people often forget that you can go to Steam and there's way more information on here than the dev diaries even give. So, China, the mandate of heaven. A lot of this we've actually already covered, but they talk about meritocracy being the title of a unique Chinese government system where you earn merit. It's in italics there, so I'm assuming that means it's like a new currency system, through deeds or the imperial examinations, which is probably some kind of activity, gaining favour and influence. Since we know that China is going to be based on the administration government, we can therefore assume that merit is going to be like the influence for the Byzantines, and you build up merit to try and find your way higher inside of the Chinese court. I just hope they don't turn me into a eunuch. Additionally, they talk again about the Imperial Treasury, but this time, bear with me, to fund great projects, that's in italics, big, defend against disasters, potentially big, and expand your influence. So, great projects, is that the confirmation of the returning of great projects from CK2, perhaps seen through the lens of Imperator Rome, where instead of just building the legendary buildings and then you're done with them, there are these long-standing projects that you have to build up, not just you click a button, spend the gold and it's done, but you continue building on it. It tells a story of how you had to do it. Maybe there are like unlocks for certain aspects to it that are unique for your character depending on stuff that you've done, and the monument itself actually tells a story of a great deed you achieved. There could be a lot of potential if great projects are produced in the way that I'm considering they could be from previous iterations. Not to mention the fact that this could be a revitalization of Legends of the Dead, where the legend system of course gave you the legendary buildings, but if we were to scrap them, which I'd be completely okay with, and instead give them a unique great project buff that you can get, where now you can add something to a great project that is themed to the legend that you completed, I'd be completely okay with that. Honestly, as much as I love the infinite life exploit legendary buildings, great projects would be easily taking precedence. As for disasters, that is super interesting because that was on my wish list. I was thinking about like volcanoes or bad weather or something like that. And if they are adding disasters and you have to navigate them by spending the Imperial Treasury's money, again, new conflict, more friction to deal with. This is a good direction. Further down, we've got Japan, getting a pretty sizable amount of text here. Take control of a Japanese clan and forge your destiny, presumably not using the same clan system as the Muslims currently use, but a separate system. Rise through the intricate courtly system to become a mighty shogun, or Kampaku regent. Their use of the word shogun here is super important, because shoguns are not the emperor. The emperor is pretty consistently going through one sort of lineage, so the idea that you can become the shogun is going to be super interesting for how it manages inside of a unique government type. Everything they're saying here is giving me a lot of hope. Strengthen your position through alliances, intrigue and ritual, well that's typical CK3, or unite the clans through the strength of your samurai armies. Okay, well that's just fanboy nonsense. Get out of here. We already know people love Japan, okay? Everybody wants to play in Japan. That's a given. Further down we see the Southeast Asians with the God Kings and Temple Empires rule as a Davaja with the Nelson Mandela government. Uniting tributaries into vast temple-centered empires. So this is kind of the first step towards theocracies in some ways then, if it's going to be about managing temples and working heavily within faith. It seems that in Indonesia, you'll have to pay tribute to the God King by performing tributary missions as a tributary ruler, increasing favour with your subjects. God King, eh? Now, I can't say that my interest in playing in this region is massively high. However, here's a nugget for you to chew on. What if there's a way, and I hope it's ridiculously difficult, and it takes tons of time, to become a God King? Perhaps through some great, massive ordeal, kind of like becoming a conqueror for a landless character. You can try and claim some kind of mandate of being God King. Not even in Southeast Asia, I'm just saying in some other part of the world, maybe through a heresy religion. The idea of deification and saints is of course slept on, and will probably be seen in some religious DLC, but the inclusion of the concept of a God King inherent could mean a player character being a God King further down the line. And the final part of this yap session is explore the Silk Road, new bookmarks and flavour. Well, a new bookmark is interesting considering they only ever said they'd do 2, then they went back on themselves and did 3, and now they're saying new bookmarks. So is that going to mean a new date? Probably not, but it's not impossible. No way they're doing another date, surely not. Thrive along the expansive Silk Road by profiting from the wealth and innovations of China, even if you are far beyond its borders. This is of course an early step into what will be, probably next year, some kind of merchant, trade and economy rework, and the Silk Road is going to be pretty pivotal to how it works. It seems an interesting coincidence that in this year we have both Graveyard of Empires, introducing what was a Silk Road formable nation that I think just became an aspect of the Timurid Empire, but there was the Silk Road, and now this DLC that also has the Silk Road. Additionally, there's mention of Innovations of China. I mean, goodness, that could be so many things. But I've been playing quite a bit of KCD2, and they have the boomstick pistol, so maybe there's a way for you to try and smuggle the innovation of gunpowder into Europe early enough that you can actually start working with gunpowder in maybe, let's say, the 1200s, and suddenly you're 200 years early with guns in Europe. Now that could be some pretty fun gameplay. With that, we have come to the end of our dev diary. They talked briefly on the new patch that was released 1.15, just kicking off chapter 4, which I won't be covering. It's pretty good though. In terms of the overall thoughts about this chapter, my initial reaction is, it isn't what I had wanted, but I haven't lost all confidence in what it can deliver. Legends of the Dead was undoubtedly hyper mid that only felt worse as it went on. Roads to Power was something of a rejuvenation. Even though administration governments aren't necessarily the greatest thing in the world, they're not awful either, and I think the landless gameplay really gave some breath of fresh air into the game. Wandering Nobles went on to solidify what they'd already achieved, and was basically just an all-round good addition to the game. With that being considered, you have to know that the work on Roads to Power was the setup for this DLC, Asia, and so in some ways you might consider they've been working on this for quite some time, which does give me some confidence that this could be a pretty good chapter. The weakest link to me seems to be Coronations. It's a little bit disappointing that such a finite scope of content, just sticking a crown on a head, has been chosen for the third slot, because there are so few slots for things to be added. Nevertheless, you cannot please everyone, and if Paradox has shown us anything, it seems that every year they're adding something completely new. This isn't just a rehashing of CK2. CK3 is its own game, and whether it's going to be Royal Courts, the travel system, landless gameplay, and now Asia, there's always going to be something brand new each year. With that being said though, I hope you enjoyed this review, thought process and coverage of the Chapter 4 announcement. I know it was a lot of talking, so well done for getting through it. If you liked this video and maybe want me to cover more dev diaries and content towards CK3, then please let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think about the chapter. What did you want to see instead of this, or is this exactly what you wanted? If you liked this video, then please feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I guess I'll see you all next time. And bye.